Hey guys, it's Lisa and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to make over some items in a retro kitchen look. And the reason for it is because I thrifted these jars at a good price, and I also wanted to use the color Mint Julep, which is a Dixie Belle color. So these jars I'm going to make into little canisters for the kitchen. And I know that this one has some separating on the top there, but I'm not worried about that because I'm just going to take some of my clay mold, or clay that I use in my clay molds, and I'm just going to fill that in with the clay and then paint it, and then you'll never know those cracks were even there. Now I wanted to remove the little rubber seal so that it would make it easier to paint, but I'm just going to have to paint around it because it wouldn't come off. It was made to where it would be really hard to come off or hard to get back on if I got it off. Now the other two jars I'm going to be able to remove those, but this one I'll just have to kind of work around it. So I fill that in good with the clay, and then while it's still wet, because it's less likely to crack that way, I'm going to go ahead and paint it. And this lid is going to get 2 coats of the color Mint Julep. And I'm even going to paint the inside. That's why I really would have loved to have gotten that rubber seal off. But I'm just going to very carefully paint around that because these jars are going to be clear. And so you're going to be able to see that. So I just wanted to make sure that it was the same color. It's still doable. It just makes it a little more tedious. But it's worth the time to paint the inside of it, I feel like. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other 2 lids, except that they don't have any damage on them. So I'm just going to paint the inside and outside of those lids. And again, I'll be able to remove the rubber seal on these and just put it back on when I'm finished. But I wanted to make a little riser for these to make it look more like a set. So I just took a 1x6, I think, and cut it the length that I needed it, and sanded around the edges. And now I'm just taking these little drawer pulls and I'm going to make the feet with this, and I'm going to paint these in the same color. But I want the base of the riser just to be the wood color, so I'm just going to put a brown wax on it. But before I do that, I want to glue these feet on. So I'm going to use a combination of both Titebond for permanent hold and hot glue for temporary hold while that dries. So when I'm gluing on the feet, and I put the Titebond on first, you don't want to put the hot glue on first because it dries too quickly. So I put my Titebond on first, and I leave just enough room to put a little bit of hot glue so that it will hold it while it dries. And then once everything is dry completely, then I'll go over the whole thing with some brown wax, including the feet, because I like how that changes up this color. It just tones it down just enough, but it keeps that vintage look. And then I said I used a brown wax on this, but I didn't use a brown wax. I used a brown glaze, the Van Dyke brown glaze. So I'm sorry about that. I know I said it more than once, but I actually used brown glaze, and I'm seeing it here as I'm voicing over. So I went ahead and used that on all these lids also. And as you can see, it's a subtle difference, but it does make a difference. It's definitely worth the extra step to do this. It just tones that down, but also gives it more of an aged look. And I just really like the look of this glaze on this color. So once I get all this done, I want to make these look. This is giving it a vintage look, but I also want to give it kind of a retro vintage look. So I'm going to be adding some grain sack striping on the jars. Now I will say that it's a little difficult on jars to do that, because you have to make sure that you get that paint really tight or it bleeds. And I did get some bleeding that I had to go back and clean up. But you're going to do this basically the same way you do on anything else. I just measured where my center was, and I took my first piece of tape and put right down the center. I'm not doing it vertically. I'm going to do it horizontally, and I want it to go all the way around. But that first wider stripe, and I'm going to put 3 stripes on each of these, but the first wider stripe is going to be made using a piece of tape right down the center. And with this one, I just have to get it somewhat in the center. I don't have to be exact. The other two, I'm going to have to be pretty exact on them because they're going to be right beside each other, so they need to be lined up perfectly. But essentially, what I do is I put this first piece down and make sure that it's good and snug. And then I tape one at the top of it, touching it, and one at the bottom of it, touching it, right exactly beside it. And then once I get both pieces taped down beside on either side of this, then I can remove this piece, and that will be my my stencil for my first stripe. So again, I'm taping on both sides of my original piece of tape and getting it right up next to it, and then I make sure that that's secure down, and then I remove the middle piece, and then that will leave that empty space there for my first stripe. And then I can just brush a couple of coats on that, and then add my next piece. Now generally what I do is I continue using this same kind of tape, and I just wait on each step to dry really well. But I didn't want to wait on it to dry really well, and so what I end up doing is after I create this first piece, or this first stripe, then I just let it dry to the touch, and then I use some regular washi tape, just a really thin washi tape that is the width that I need it to be between this stripe and the next one. And then I don't have to wait on it to dry, because if I were to use a thicker piece, I would have to overlap my first stripe, and that would mean letting it dry for some time. Now this takes 2 coats, and what I decided to do on my top coat, and I actually could have done it on all of them. A viewer once told me, and I can't remember who it was, but it was a viewer, and she said to put some top coat in with your paint, and then you won't have to seal your paint afterwards. And that comes in handy with jars, because if I were to try to seal it, I would have to try to get that sealer just on the line. Otherwise, I would make my clear jar cloudy around it. So that's not ideal for that. And spraying it with a clear coat is not ideal, because it would change the look of my glass. So here I am just adding some of my top coat in with my paint. And then I just stirred it up well, and it went on just like the paint generally does, except that now it's sealed. But I thought that was a really good tip, and definitely something that I'll be doing from now on. And then I'll do the same thing with this. Once I get that tape on and I get it pressed down securely, then I'll remove that washi tape, and that will be the stencil for my next 2 stripes. And I did that on all these jars. And anyway, I was really happy with how it turned out, and I think they both have a really vintage look to them now, and they'll go really well in my vignette. And then I just took some other little kitchen tools that I had that hadn't sold. This had a black handle, and I painted the green on it, and then painted this handle. It was red, so I painted it that green. And then this was just a rolling pin that I thrifted, and I painted it in that color. And then you might have noticed some mushrooms on the hang tags of some of these items. And I got some napkins given to me by my friend, and decided I don't do a whole lot with mushrooms, but I feel like they have a really vintage look. So I decided to add some of that to this vignette. And I'm just going to do this with this little sign that someone gave me. And I'm just putting 2 coats of the color buttercream, and then I'm going to decoupage that napkin on it, and that will just add a little shelf sitter that can be displayed in my vignette. But first I want to add a little bit of this color to it as well. So all I'm going to do is just paint down around the edges of this. And I didn't even have to do 2 coats on this. I just did 1 coat. And then I put a top coat on it. And after I put my decoupage on the front. But this is just a simple way that you can either add a color into your vignette, or you could add a subject in, like the mushrooms. I put some mushrooms on some of the hang tags, and then obviously this will be a mushroom shelf sitter. And although most of you I know have decoupaged with napkins, for the ones of you who haven't, when you decoupage with a napkin, you want to separate the layers of the napkin. Usually you'll have 3 layers, the printed layer and then 2 other layers underneath. This one actually had 3 layers. Occasionally there'll be one with only 2 layers, but you want to definitely make sure that you take all the layers off that don't have the print on them, because if not, when you go to decoupage that, they'll start to separate, and it won't lay on it right at all. So definitely, and if you start having your napkin to pull up, then most likely you have an extra layer that you didn't remove, and at that point it's too late usually. Now I'm not bothering to cut this first. I just lay it straight on there, because when you put your decoupage over the top of this, it's going to tear very easily on the sharp edges of this board here. So it's very easy to just tear it off there, or you could let it dry completely and take some sandpaper and go around the edges, and that will also cut it off and make it smooth. And napkins, although they are very, very good to decoupage with, I really like them a lot. You have to use a light touch because they will tear very easily. So just use a very light touch when you Mod Podge over the top of that. And in this case, I just tore this off. But then once it dried well, I did go around the edges with some fine grit sandpaper and clean that up even more. But I think that made a really cute shelf sitter that will go well in that vignette. Now I have a beautiful hang tag today that I'm so excited to show you. And this one comes all the way from Spain. I'm going to show her name because I can't really pronounce it, and I don't want to say it wrong. But I love this one so much. It has so much character, and I love all that texture and vintage laces and trim. I love the photo frame in the front, and the butterfly is just all so beautiful. And I think it was so creative that even on the back, she put the back of a lady, and I just thought that was so beautiful with that hat. It was such a creative idea to do that for the back of the hang tag. And look at all that texture there with the pink netting. I think that was just so pretty. This is just an absolutely beautiful hang tag. And here I'm showing her name, and she is from Spain, and I think that's S-A-L-A-T. I'm not sure how to say that, but I think that was just such a beautiful hang tag. And I know these were more simple thrift flips, other than the jars. Those took a little bit, but I think a lot of times all you need to do is just change them up just a little bit, and it will make all the difference in how it sells. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great evening, and God bless you and your family.